Assalamualaikum and a very pleasant day I bid to all. So under the topic, the role of government, we shall first discuss three important functions of the government in the aggregate economy. The first important function of the government in the aggregate economy is to redistribute wealth among the general public. The main tools of redistribution of wealth of the government is by taxation and transfer payments. Taxation is imposed to receive funds and income to the government, which can be used to pay transfer payments to individuals who do not do any productive work. Moving on to the second important function of the government, which is to provide non-competitive goods and services to the general public. These services and goods include public parks, national defense, and national highways. As these goods do not usually have a place in the general market, the government has to provide these goods and services to the general public to ensure they enjoy good quality of life. Finally, the third important function of the government in the economy is to stabilize the economy itself. Through imposing monetary and fiscal policies, the government is able to overcome economic recessions.
Okay, so now I am going to explain about national budget. There are three types of national budget. But first, let me explain about budgeting. Okay, budgeting is the method of calculating income and expenditures for a given period of time. A country's expenditure is called a national budget, also known as government budget, and the government generates revenue through taxes and fees. There are three types of budget. Firstly is the balanced budget. Balanced budget is when the total expenditure of the government is just the same as its total revenue. So basically, the money spent by the government is equal to the government income. Okay, secondly is the surplus budget. Surplus budget is when the total expenditure of the government is less than the total revenue. A government has the option of repaying its bonds or receiving returns on its asset. This ensures that the government's revenue from taxation is higher than the amount it spends on public assistance. Lastly is the deficit budget. Deficit budget is when the total expenditure exceeds its total revenue. For a deficit budget, a country must either borrow from external or internal sources or use its savings. Okay, so now I am going to explain the two types of tax structure. So first one is proportional tax and secondly is progressive tax. Okay, so this is the example of proportional tax. No matter if your income is higher or lower, you will need to pay the same total tax rate like you can see in the table. Proportional tax is one that applies to all income classes at the same time. The low, middle, and high income earners pay the same amount of tax. For example, Aminah, Raju, and Bay have different levels of income, which is 1,000 ringgit for Aminah, 2,000 ringgit for Raju, and 3,000 ringgit for Bay. All of them have to pay the same total tax rate, which is 5%. Okay, so next is progressive tax. Progressive tax is when the higher your income is, the higher total tax rate that you need to pay, as you can see in the table. A progressive tax is a tax rate that increases as income rises. The higher one's salary, the higher the tax rate. A progressive tax has a greater financial effect on higher income people than it does on lower income people. When an individual's income rises, their tax rate as well as the tax responsibility rises. For example, Aminah, Raju, and Bay have different levels of income, which is 1,000 ringgit for Aminah, 2,000 ringgit for Raju, and 3,000 ringgit for Bay. all of them have to pay a different total tax rate, which is 8% for Aminah, 12% for Raju, and 17% for Bay.
Now, let me explain about the instruments of monetary policy used by central bank. Instruments of monetary policy consist of two instruments, which is quantitative instruments and qualitative instruments. Tools in quantitative instruments consist of open market operations, legal cash reserve requirements, bank or discount rate, and funding. And qualitative instruments tools consist of selective credit control, interest rate, and special directive. Today, my explanation will focus on three quantitative instruments, which is open market operation, legal cash reserve requirement, and bank or discount rate. First, open market operation. Open market operation is act of buying and selling government securities. This will influence cash reserve in commercial banks. Second, central bank can change direction of open market operations according to the circumstances, meaning that they can increase or decrease cash reserve in commercial bank just by selling securities, and commercial bank will purchase it, and it will result to decrease cash reserve in commercial bank. Second, like legal cash reserve requirement. Legal cash reserve requirement is minimum amount of cash of commercial banks to keep in central banks. This will affect on amount of excess cash reserve in commercial banks, also their ability to lend. Next point is central bank will vary the cash and requirement amount of cash of commercial banks depending on circumstances. For example, during inflation, central bank will raise the minimum legal cash reserve amount to restrain credit creation by commercial bank and at the same time reduce money supply. Lastly, bank or discount rate. Bank or discount rate is the interest rate central bank charge on loans of reserve to banks. Next, changes in bank or discount rate affect the cost of borrowing that are available to banks from central bank. For example, if central bank increase bank rate, it will result to decrease in demand for loans because the interest rate on borrowing becomes expensive.
Fiscal policy refers to the use of government expenditure and taxation to influence the country's spending, employment, and price level. There are two types of fiscal policy: expansionary fiscal policy and contractionary fiscal policy. Expansionary fiscal policy are used to overcome the unemployment or recession problems. There are four types of unemployment: frictional unemployment, cyclical unemployment, seasonal and structural unemployment. Frictional unemployment occurs when people are in between jobs, re-entering and entering labor force. Next, cyclical unemployment. Cyclical unemployment happens when there is lack of jobs because of downswing in business cycle or a recession. Structural unemployment arises due to the structural changes in the economy of a country. Lastly, seasonal unemployment. Seasonal unemployment arises due to seasonal variation in the activities of a particular industries. Expansionary fiscal policy is adopted to overcome unemployment or recession problems. In recession, the economy suffers from rising unemployment, falling income, and shrinking economic activity. The government will increase public spending by undertaking public works programs and reduce taxes. The effect of tax cuts would increase the amount of disposable income of individuals and business firms.
My friend just now has already mentioned about the monetary policy. Now, let me tell you what the government should do in order to control inflation using monetary policy. Firstly, using the open market operation, which the government needs to sell government bonds from the central bank to the public. So what is bond? Bond is basically represents the loans. Who should buy the bond? Who should buy the security? It could be the commercial bank, firms, or individuals. Let's say if a firm
purchase the security from Maybank Investment Berhad, for example. So this will help to decrease the money supply and the cash reserve of the commercial bank. Because the government did not supply the money, but instead we are the one who give the money to the government by purchasing the bond or the security. Next, the government can use the legal cash reserve requirement. So the central bank will increase the minimum legal cash reserve ratio to cover the withdrawal, which in the end results in less cash reserve that can reduce and restrain credit creation by the bank. So when this happens, there is less credit that is available and people will have less money to spend on. Hence, it does reduce the money that they will spend, or they might end up keeping the money. Lastly, the bank or discount rate. The government can increase the bank or discount rate. For instance, I give an example. The government raised the interest rate of borrowing. This can discourage the citizen from borrowing as the interests are high. Thus, the demand for loans will also decrease. It will decrease the money supply too, as people might feel that borrowings are not worthy. As inflation could cause a fall in the value of money, and it will make the economy become uncompetitive. So the government must find a way to control inflation. Thus, there are the measures that I have already mentioned earlier, which are the open market operation, legal cash reserve requirement, and bank or discount rate that are able to help the government reduce the money supply in order to control inflation. That is all from me now. Thank you.